I've been waiting for you.
Hello everyone, it's yugioh back with another video. Today, I'm going to be introducing this new series on my channel where I review all the Yu-Gi-Oh series, and within the past 2 days I've watched every series in their episode 1. So let's just jump into Duel Monsters first. I've seen this episode like several times within the dub version. This is my second time watching the sub version, and I enjoyed it. The episode's called The Terrifying Blue Eyes White Dragon. What I like about the episode was that it was a great duel for what it was at the time. We had the Yugioh summon, it was great. The music I really did enjoy. I'm a huge fan of Passionate Duelist. I'm just a huge fan of the Duel Monsters composer. The Yugioh summoning was amazing. I think that really seals the deal. That summoning sort of boosted my rating up to a 0.5. Initially I gave it, and I'll tell you guys later after the end of this Duel Monsters review. The episode was wonderful. I mean, they did a good job on capitalizing the whole friendship aspect. When Anzu made the whole friendship symbol before Yu-Gi-Oh was about to commence in his duel with Kaiba. I think Grandpa Moto got a lot of development in this episode, even though in the later portions of Duelist Kingdom, he really doesn't get the shine. I mean, there are a few episodes here and there during the Little Girl from America arc, and then that one filler arc, I think it was a KC Grandship filler arc where he gets to duel Junochi, master versus student. So I like that little whole aspect that they added on there. But what I like about this episode is that Grandpa Moto has his card Blue Eyes White Dragon, and Kaiba comes into the game shop and he asks for Grandpa Moto if he could buy it off of him, and he just says no. He says, nah, this card means a lot to me because it was by a friend who's later introduced about 39 episodes from now, somewhere around there. His name's Arthur, and he has a little daughter named Rebecca Hopkins who's very, very annoying. But I just feel like this episode as well, but I do have my cons with it. And my cons is that if you guys have read the original manga, I'm not going to be making comparisons from the manga after this point on because that's not fair, right? But what Duelist Kingdom tried to do, at least for episode 1 of Duelist Kingdom, was they tried to get the whole Det T portion of the manga and then volume 7 and just add it in there. So if you read volume 7 chapter 1, we literally get the same thing. And then they had this whole Kaiba duel in it, which didn't happen in volume 7 of the manga. So they took that whole duel from Det T and they sort of did parallels, with Grandpa going to the hospital. Grandpa and Det T couldn't survive the whole virtual solid system that took place within that duel between Kaiba and Yugi, or between him and Kaiba. Kaiba basically wanted to replicate what happened with him in that duel between Yugi in Volume 2, which was feeling death over and over again, and that happened with Grandpa Moto. I think even in the manga, he says that his pacemaker was running out, which was kind of funny because in Bonds Beyond Time, they said that as a joke in the English dub, like, oh, my pacemaker can't handle this. So it was kind of funny that that's actually true, that Grandpa does have a pacemaker. I think the score and animation was pretty well done in this episode. I'm not going to go on about this episode because I think everyone at this point has seen this episode several times, dub or sub, and we all know what this episode is. It's a good episode. I would give it an 8.5. Taking away the Yugioh summon, I would give it an 8. And the cons that I had with this episode was that the characters were already established. That's why I talked about the whole manga thing, because we get this wonderful introduction within volume 1 of the manga. And they sort of build up their friendship circle. Like Honda initially doesn't like Yugi at all whatsoever. It isn't until I think after the Miho event where he really starts to sort of like Yugi, but that's about it. And one thing I really hate, and I know you don't apply logic to Yu-Gi-Oh, but Kaiba knowing about Grandpa's ultra rare card, aka Blue Eyes, was just horrible in my opinion. I think they should have rather done it where Kaiba is more like, I wonder what that card could be. And he sort of does do that in the Japanese dub, but it's sort of obvious that he knows that it's Blue Eyes White Dragon. Another thing I hate is that they did a horrible job with Tim noticing about Yugioh. And I'm going to make a comparison in the English dub, but that's it, no more. In the English dub, Tim thought it through a little bit more. He's like, what could these cards be? And then in this version, he has that whole dream with Grandpa Moto. And then they talk for a little bit, and then that's when Tim clicks on about Yugioh, which I'm not a fan of. But overall, I'll give this episode an 8 rather than an 8.5. My favorite quote through this episode, and yeah, each episode I'm going to be giving you guys a rating along with the quote. My favorite quote was, listen, there's nothing useless in the world, and that was stated by Grandpa Moto. Now let's talk about Yu-Gi-Oh! GX Episode 1 called Yugi's Successor. Now, I don't really need to talk about this episode that much simply because I made a review about it. I talked about the first 5 episodes in Yu-Gi-Oh! GX. So just watch the first portion about me talking about Yu-Gi-Oh! GX if you guys want to. But Episode 1's called Yugi's Successor. I gave this episode a 10 out of 10 simply because the music was wonderful, the pacing was great. They did a wonderful job with the whole DM nostalgia. They didn't overdo it. And the reason why I give this episode a 10 out of 10 is because of them doing a wonderful job with the whole passing the torch. You can consider Duel Monsters and GX sort of the same series in a sense. I shouldn't say same series, but it's like a continuation. GX, in my opinion, is a sequel series. I've been saying that for about a year now. And they just did a wonderful job on establishing Judai as a prodigy. And they did a wonderful job with Judai in that duel between Kronos, like cementing that he was a good duelist. Like Judai in that duel, if you were to put any other Yu-Gi-Oh! Protagonist, for the most part, they would have been like, oh, they would have been shocked. Well, Judai wasn't. He sort of smiled it off. I think when Kronos had Ancient Gear Golem. And what's funny is that each episode they have a monster that has 3,000 attack in it that the protagonist versus, along with 2 duels in each episode, which I thought was very, very funny. But Kronos summons that Ancient Gear Golem, and Judai sort of laughs it off. I think he gets attacked by Ancient Gear Golem or some monster. I totally forget. But he just laughs it off, and everyone in that area is just like, what? What is this dude doing? And Kaiser, or Zane, if you guys don't know, happens to state that Kronos has yet to lose from a duel when summoning this card. So Judai was the first person to defeat Kronos with Ancient Gear Golem. And not only that, Kronos just totally undermined Judai. He called him a dropout boy, and then he just loses. And I like Principal Sanjima in this episode a lot. He's like, we allow everyone to enter into the Duel Academy, even though his test was pretty bad. It was 9 points above Sho's test. I love that flashback that Judai has with Winkribo, with the Tim giving him that card. And I love a Tim in this episode. That's another reason why. My rating might be a little bit interlaced with nostalgia, along with just that whole, Yugi coming in, along with that whole Kaiba reference, and the fact that the exams take place at Kaiba Land, and that there was a Kaiba Dome in GX Episode 1. So maybe this episode's a 9, but I give it a 10. I give it a 10. And one other thing I want to talk about before I wrap this review up for Yu-Gi-Oh! GX is that they do a wonderful job setting up Misawa along with the Judai. Judai states that, yo, you're number 2, and then Misawa's like, who's number 1? He's like, I'm number 1. And then it just creates for a wonderful rivalry. I have yet to see like past episode 11 for a GX. I'm just gonna wait until this series so I can watch past episode 11, but I hope that Misawa and Judai have a duel. I do recall from my memories of watching the English dub. But yeah, I'll give this episode a 10. And my favorite quote from this episode is when Judai states to Kronos, heroes always win. That really resonated with me when I watched it for the first time, which was, I watched the sub version about a month ago, but like this is my second time watching it within the same month, so I was sort of going through my phone while watching this episode because I already knew what happened. And this episode is my favorite episode of Yu-Gi-Oh! Like, I call this the greatest episode of Yu-Gi-Oh! So far from my viewing, just because of what I stated previously. And like, I would probably wait 3 years just to watch this episode again. Like, I would not watch it until 3 years just to forget about everything and just to have that experience. Because when I watched this episode for the first time and subbed, I loved it. I just thought it was a wonderful episode. The cons that I had with this episode is they do a horrible job on creating that 10-year gap distance that GX has from Duel Monsters. But that's about it. Let's now move on to episode 1 of 5Ds titled Riding Duel Acceleration. Now, this episode, I'm going to go straight off the bat, I did not enjoy. I really did not enjoy. The visuals were amazing. Animation was on point. The pros I like about this episode is that Yusei didn't talk that much until he needed to talk. So they sort of built up that badass character that Yusei is. I mean, he didn't talk until he had to. Even when the sector security came in, or I don't know what they call it in the subversion, but even when the cops came in, Yusei didn't talk until I think that one dude was about to hit Rally or just sort of do something to Rally. Yusei's like, chill out, I got this. And he jammed the signal that Rally, that the sector security got from Rally's sector mark. And I do apologize for calling them by the English version simply because I don't know the name yet. One thing I like about this episode is the intro. So it starts off with Yusei and Jack. They're both on their D wheels. Yusei is he's sort of testing out his D wheel along with Jack. He's having this duel. He's trying to, keep that title of Duel King. And that person that he was dueling, I didn't really like his design. His name happened to be Enjo Mukuro. And I'm sorry if I just completely butchered that. And I like the fact that Yusei and his friends, Rally and all of them, were talking about Jack. And even at one point in the episode, Rally sort of stole this chip to help out Yusei get revenge at Jack. And We don't really know what happens yet between Yusei and Jack, and I totally forget. We just know that Jack stole Yusei's card, which happens to be Stardust Dragon. And then we get Trudge, the man that stood the test of time, the man that literally appears in one chapter of the Yu-Gi-Oh manga and then 20 years later appears in Yu-Gi-Oh 5Ds, which doesn't make sense. I think that's an issue that I have with this episode, is the fact that they have Trudge in this episode. Even though it should make sense on him still being alive and youthful and looking young in that episode, it doesn't really make sense. But the duel between Yusei and Yugioh was okay. I like that Yusei had his life points down to 100 due to Yugioh's montage dragon. But the cons that I have with this episode is the music. That really turned me off. I'm not a huge fan of this techno music that 5Ds has to it, and I don't like that they didn't explain where they are and what's happening. And that might get explained, of course, in the later portions, but I do enjoy the whole maturity that 5Ds has to it. It's very mature. Like, I watched Duel Monsters and GX. They were all light and happy. Of course, they had their very much evil and dark parts, at least in episode 1 of Duel Monsters. I totally forgot to mention this, but I'm going to mention this right now. I love Kaiba in that episode. He came off as so menacing. He literally put Yugi's grandpa in the hospital, but prior to that, called Yugi and told him that he did something with his grandpa. It's wonderful. It's wonderful on Kaiba's end. But another con that I have with this episode is the lack of explaining stuff. I mean, I know that I'm supposed to wait for a few more episodes, but I don't know. I just didn't like that. Like, at least they could have told us about the whole satellite event. And the final thing that really sort of made me give this episode a 7 out of 10 is there was no wow factor in this episode. There really wasn't a wow factor, at least for me. The quote for this episode is from Jack Atlas, and he states that there's only one king, it's me. Yu-Gi-Oh! Zexal episode 1, titled I'm Feeling the Flow. So let's talk about the quote first. This episode was amazing. I totally, for the last 2 years of my life, have talked so much bad about Zexal. Or I shouldn't say talked bad about Zexal, rather, never gave Zexal a chance. I was never optimistic about Zexal or Arc 5. And you guys are actually going to be very shocked about my ratings for Arc 5 and Zexal. So let's just talk about the quote first for this episode. It's by Yuma. Yuma was gonna lose the duel from Shark, and Shark was completely a dick in this episode, which I love. I mean, he was talking bad about Tetsuo, he was talking bad about all these people, he was talking bad about Yuma's deck. Yuma says this: no matter how many times I fail, no matter how many times I'm laughed at, I've always brought it to them, and that hasn't changed because I am who I am and I believe in myself. I think from the start to the end of this episode, everything was wonderful. They start off with this whole just weird start. I mean, Yuma has a dream and it's this weird thing talking to him, and it states that open the door, but once you open it, you're going to lose something important. And I have no idea what that is yet. And then it starts off with Yuma getting late to school and his grandma. His grandma's funny. Like, his grandma's basically Joji of Zexal. Of course, less perverted and, you know, just a lot more toned down, but in terms of humor, I would say that. You know, and the fact that the dream happens at the end of the episode, I thought was wonderful. I love that Yuma also states that he's lost many duels, and I just like that Yuma isn't a good duelist, and for once we don't have a prodigy duelist. Like, Judai is obviously a prodigy, Yusei's a prodigy just from looking at it, Tim's a prodigy. I mean, he's the biggest prodigy in Yu-Gi-Oh! You can say Yugi as well, but I mean, Tim's a Tim. I mean, he just comes back in DSOD, does the biggest ass pull in Yu-Gi-Oh! And defeats Cubic Aigami in an instant. And one thing I want to mention is the parallels. So Astral comes in the last portion of the episode. He states to Yuma, get up, duel. And this is very similar to Tim's introduction. And I know I'm talking about the Yu-Gi-Oh! Manga, and I do apologize for that, but a Tim comes in to Yugi's life when he needs him. If a Tim never came into Yugi's life, Yugi would have been completely battered by Yugioh. Yugioh would have honestly crushed Yugi into a little ball and throw him and just bully him and harass him. And that's when a Tim came in. A Tim comes in at the right time. And same with Astral. Astral comes in when Yuma is about to lose the duel with Shark, and we don't know who the winner is, but I'm just going to guess that Yuma wins the duel simply because Astral comes in. And they do a wonderful job on the whole utilization of the school aspect and the references to Yuma's father and mother. I mean, that's the first time we ever get to hear about Yu-Gi-Oh! Parents, both of them, rather than just the mom or the father. So this episode's wonderful. Cons about this episode is really nothing. I have no flaws about this episode. I thoroughly enjoyed it. And if you guys think my ratings are a little bit too high, this is the first episode, so I'm going to give, of course, high rating. As the episodes proceed to go on and I get more knowledge about what happens in the plot and compare them from the previous episodes, my ratings are going to get a little bit more realistic. But yeah, I give this episode a 9.5, which is, yeah, a high rating, right? Now let's talk about Yu-Gi-Oh! Arc 5, the series that got a lot of hate towards the end of it. So Yu-Gi-Oh! Arc 5, Episode 1, titled The Trail of Light Pendulum Summon. This episode is wonderful. All the episodes I saw within the past 2 days, this is easily the best. Initially, I called GX the greatest episode of Yu-Gi-Oh!, which it still is in my opinion, because of nostalgia interlaced into it. But taking away the nostalgia, because I have no nostalgia for Arc 5. I literally, for the most part of my Yu-Gi-Oh! Liking, I had sort of thoughts in the back of my head that, yo, this show is pretty bad. This show is not good. But this episode was wonderful. I mean wonderful. I saw this a few hours prior to this recording, and I said, wow, they did everything wonderful. I love that Yuya lived under his father's shadow, and I love that quote that his father said to him: when you're down, sway the pendulum back and forth until, you know, you get back into check. And that sort of does play a huge part with this duel against Strong. Strong actually defeated Yuya's father, I'm pretty sure, in an entertainment duel. And then his father just disappeared, which we have no information about just yet. They incorporated Yuya's father wonderfully in this episode. Towards the ending of the duel, when Yuya does pendulum summon, he has that flashback about what his father said to him. And we see that Yuma's very happy early on this episode, and then he goes from sad and he's like lost and depressed, and then he does that whole pendulum thing that his father told him to do, that whole advice. And in that duel, he does what he's supposed to do. He's supposed to be an enthusiastic action dueler, an entertainment duelist, and he just does that. Later on throughout that duel, when Yuya is running away and everyone's like, why is he running? Even Go and Zaka is basically like, Yuya, why are you running away? Fight like a man and go toe to toe. And Yuya's mother comes in and she states that Yuya's trying to find himself, and she talks about how he was basically a clown. He was hiding behind a clown's mask for 3 years. And the funny thing is, when the duel starts off, Yuya is literally behind Strong and people aren't noticing, and he's wearing a clown outfit. I mean, the music was wonderful about this episode. The duel was amazing. The fact that Strong was sort of shocked at Yuma when Yuma was running away, that's what people thought. He was actually gathering action cards. And then he does this wonderful combo summoning Odd Eyes Pendulum Dragon. And when it seemed like the high point of the episode was when he was about to defeat Strong with this monster, when he activated that balloon card to bring his monster's attack down to 3,000. And initially I thought he was gonna win the duel, but Strong had a face down card, and Yuya looked like he was about to lose that duel. But then later on they have this amazing, like, sort of just wonderful moment. I mean, the visuals for this episode was amazing. 5Ds is definitely the best episode in terms of animation and art, but this episode does a lot of things extra, like the way they duel. Even with Zexal's episode, the whole duel layout that they have, the intro for this episode was amazing. I mean, I can go on and talk a lot of positives about this episode. I really have no negatives about this episode. And I will say this, I'm going to give this episode a 10 out of 10, yeah. As for Vrains, the more I watch the other Yu-Gi-Oh! Series episodes, the more I was sort of critical about Vrains and it being the latest series. Vrains jumps into the action. It has a whole mature outlook to it. It does a better job than 5Ds in terms of the action and the plot, in my opinion. I mean, I just wasn't a fan of episode 1 of 5Ds, to be quite honest. And that's probably on the bottom of my ranking. I'm going to give a ranking of each episode. But I feel like for Vrains, it was too much. And yeah, I don't know how it's too much, but they just did too much without little information. I do appreciate that they did a time skip. The animation was decent. The music was okay. I think Arc 5 has the best music so far from all these episodes. But I'm just not a fan of episode 1 of Vrains in comparison to these. I still like it. I gave it like an 8 or something like that. But I'm going to drop my Vrains rating down to a 7, to be quite honest. So let's talk about my list so far and what I give each episode. So the list is, for the number 1 spot, it's Yu-Gi-Oh! GX. The number 2 spot is Arc 5. Number 3 is Zexal. Number 4 is probably Duel Monsters. Number 5 happens to be... Actually, I'm going to switch. Number 5 happens to be Vrains. Number 6 is 5Ds. Yeah, 5Ds is at the bottom. I have no idea why. But I guess that's the video for today. Thank you very much for watching. And if you guys enjoyed this series, comment that down below. I really did enjoy watching these episodes. There wasn't a bad episode at all. Even though 5Ds didn't live up to my standards and I wasn't a fan of the music, it was still enjoyable, passable. It wasn't dreadful. So I guess that's the video for today. Thank you very much for watching. Subscribe for more Yu-Gi-Oh! Content. Comment down below what your guys' favorite episode is. In addition to that, check out the Yu-Gi-Oh! Facebook and Twitter fan page, which is linked down below.